when
Yeah.
you just don't understand, you just don't know, you just don't know. You can't see the wood for the trees, you can't make any sense of anything, and you just know. And quite often you're in crisis mode because there's really difficult things going on, and you're just hanging on to, the bit of faith that you've got and the hope. You're just hanging on, aren't you? Welcome to the Destiny Coaching Ministries podcast. I'm Tina Southgate. My desire for you is for you to discover more how to live your purpose fully with co-creative transformational coaching.
Welcome to this podcast where we're going to talk about valley times and difficult times in our journey with God with Tina. And Tina, could you tell us about what inspired you to discuss this topic on this podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I just recently have realized that I'm coming out of a valley time myself in my own life. And by that, I mean, I'll talk about it in a bit, but a difficult few, 3 or 4 years, difficult time. And it's just caused me to really think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you like to discuss with us how that topic's gone when you've been talking to your friends about it and sharing what other friends are going through as well?
Yeah, so I met up with a couple of friends last night who are a similar age to me, similar, and we've discovered that we're all at quite similar stages in our journey with God and with our calling and with our purpose. And it was just so interesting to compare notes as to the kind of difficulties that we have been experiencing. And obviously, we're all different people. But there's some similar patterns in the difficult times that have been happening to all of us, and different responses from all of us to it, but kind of like beginning to understand and suss out what God's up to and how it's part of his ultimate plan to take us into, to prepare us for the stage after the valley, if you like, when he uses all of the stuff that happened in the afterwards. And it was just really interesting just to chat with them, and I thought it would be make a good subject because so many other people are going through difficult times or have gone through them, and making sense of them and understanding them and actually coming out with hope and encouragement is quite hard sometimes. I don't know whether you think that, Gerard.
Yeah, definitely. It's very frustrating not knowing why things are changing and what's going on with God because it doesn't make sense from conventional Christian understanding. And how do you engage with God when nothing makes sense? Yeah,
Yeah, and you've got, like, when you talk about Christian understanding, you've obviously got those that sit on the side of the fence that, suffering's part of the Christian journey and we're to take up our cross daily. And, it's not that I disagree with that, but I also sort of believe that God is a good God, and, all of the things that happen to us are all, he turns it all to good, as well. So it's kind of finding your way through that, isn't it, when you go through a prolonged period of things being very difficult and hard.
well, I'd say the most frustrating thing to me is how do you journey with God well when nothing's actually making sense the way it used to?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because like if you're going to go through something painful or something confusing, the real question is how do I hold on to God well during this? Yeah,
And that's something that I wanted to talk about as well, because I the valley time that I've just been through is called the Valley of Identity. And this is according to Tony Stolfus's coaching model, the calling journey, which is one model which I found really helpful. There are other models that I've also put together for people within the co-creative coaching model, but this particular one, so helpful, and I've recommended it to so many people. And he's kind of done the research. He's talked to dozens of sort of Christian, very strong, mature Christian leaders in the sort of latter part of their life, and identified a pattern through different stages that they've all been through. It differs from person to person, the length of the stage, and what God deals with, because we're all different. We all have different stuff, right? But there's a third valley. There's three main valleys that you go on in terms of on the journey towards the fulfillment of your calling, and the final one is the valley of identity. Now, I knew about this like 13, 14 years ago. I knew this was something that was going to come, and I read all about it. I've taught it. I've coached people through it. I've led workshops, and yet there I was going through it and not recognizing it for years until right at the end where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what's been going on. That's what happened. No wonder. So even knowing the stuff, it can take you by surprise, which I guess is the whole point, isn't it? Because if you understood everything from the start of a valley, it wouldn't be as hard. But sorry, the way that related to what you just said, Gerard, is the not knowing is all part of God's way of building the faith, isn't it? When
Yeah.
you just don't understand, you just don't know, you just don't know. You can't see the wood for the trees, you can't make any sense of anything, and you just know. And quite often you're in crisis mode because there's really difficult things going on, and you're just hanging on to, the bit of faith that you've got and the hope. You're just hanging on, aren't you?
Do you want to share some of the top key factors that Tony identifies in the Valley of Identity so people have an idea of what the challenge looks like?
Well, let me share it from my experience of my valley and, chatting with friends as well last night. One of the things in the Valley of Identities, and there's three valleys. So those of you that are maybe younger listening to this podcast, you might identify with these, even though you're not in your Valley of Identity. God's probably been dealing with some of this stuff anyway. But the Valley of Identity is quite an extreme one, in terms of roles, position, job, job title and roles. Quite often people get stripped of a role. And it might be retirement, for example. They might be retiring and all of a sudden they don't have the sort of job title, the position that they've always had. And the idea of this is that if our identity is wrapped up in our job and our position and our title, then it's not obviously wrapped up in God and being a child of God. So it's an unhealthy tie with our identity, and it's kind of more about what we do than who we are. So that's why we can go through this valley when, for some people, it's a job title they've had for years and years. It's just a comfortable place. It's a place where they're, become known. They've got reputation. It's a status in a way, and if that gets stripped away, that can be part of the valley of identity. Two or three other things as well. Let me just mention them quickly. Finances. Tony talks about financial reverses. It usually means, finances are no longer maybe stable or as abundant as they were. Um, Again, that's another thing, isn't it, Gerard? That sometimes we may unknowingly have identity wrapped around a certain level of salary or income, or society's very much like this as well, isn't it? It's like people who are more, shall we say, more um, revered or respected in society would maybe the ones that have the higher paying positions or whatever. And I know we don't want to be like that as Christians, and it's not entirely like that. But if we're been blessed, financially and everything's always been good, and then all of a sudden it's not, then it's helping us to learn to depend on God in a different way and not have our worth and our value wrapped up in what we're paid and how much we're paid. So that's a second one. Um,
Yeah,
there's a
so
couple more, but yeah, just let you comment on those.
I mean it's quite common for whether you're married, got children, got a house, got cars, got a good income, what influence you have to people or the world as being kind of status indicators that people use as a measurement. But it's obviously not relevant in terms of, becoming a son of God that God can trust with his power and authority in a radical way, which is the whole purpose of the Valley of Identity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and there's a
yeah,
couple more indicators. Loss of flavor, loss of favor or influence. And I think this is one of I can I'm happy to be vulnerable and share what mine's been like, but this is an area that I sort of experienced. I had a lot of favor about a decade ago. So many doors were open and there was just a lot going on. And just for a season, God just slowed it down a bit. And my reaction was to work harder and think that I wasn't doing enough. And yeah, just work, work, work. And that didn't work. Surprise, surprise. Um, I should have known that having gone through a burnout just over a decade ago already. But fortunately, I'd learned enough to know that, you know, just working harder and harder is not going to work. But yeah, so it's not, it kind of really brought me back to basics that everything we get is from God. Like we can say this, but actually, when you experience it and know that you may have experienced favor in your life, you may have experienced open doors in a really big way, but then there's times in life when that's not there to the degree maybe that it was. Same with finances. We may have always, had abundant finances, always had more than enough, or always had a certain level, and then all of a sudden it's not there. And it's a bit of a shock to the system, or a job role, or being recognized in a certain area, the influence, the recognition, like you may have had it, and then all of a sudden that's gone. Um, and you haven't even realized how much it's become a part of you and how much you have almost had like an entitlement towards it and not realized it's a gift from God, but that it's part of your own performance that's given it to you in some way. Does that
Yeah.
relate?
Yeah, because the classical understanding is that you do something and you receive something for it. Like that's the transaction in the world. But yet there's obviously more to it that God's bringing into the picture as you go through the valley of identity. It's not because like when you come out of the valley of identity, He's totally changing the whole metaphor of it's not about what you do to what you get. It's about who you are, such that God can reveal Himself through you more radically, kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way you've put that because it's yeah, when everything's stripped away, and this is like if you do get the book, it's Tony Stolfus's book, The Calling Journey, it's called. Lots of testimonies in there, but if you go to the Valley of Identity, it's when everything's stripped away. It's who am I then? Do I still feel valued? Do I still feel worthy? Am I still able to feel joy in that season? Because let's face it, if we're anchored in God and who we are in Him, then that's, the ideal, obviously.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and there's one final area for me that this was a real surprise. Confidence. Like, I that got stripped away. So don't get me wrong, I was functioning, a fully functioning human being in all areas, but there was some levels of confidence around business and other areas which got, you know, which reduced for some years, and I'd never understood fully what that's like for people because I've always had so much confidence and been very happy to take risks and be in any arena really and speak to anyone about anything. So that was a really interesting one for me as well. And I have to say, out of the back of it, I feel like, and I can talk about this in a minute, but on that one alone, like what you get at the end of the valley is your confidence just gets completely reorientated.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like it's no longer where it was. I know you've experienced this, Gerard, haven't you? As
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Um, Go ahead. Yeah.
And with your confidence, it wasn't like one day you woke up and you lost your confidence. It's like your confidence was just slowly, slowly, gradually
Yeah.
reducing and being chipped away in a sense. And you don't really notice it because it's happening so slowly.
Yes.
And it's only really when you turn around and you think of doing something and you're like, that's really weird. I would have been totally comfortable believing I could do that before, but for some reason I don't now, which is
Mm.
like kind of the reality moment, which I think you've experienced in the last couple of months with some things that you're
Yeah.
stepping into.
Yeah, and also new things. I previously I would step into them and it would just be such a different experience, but it's been harder. And so I think the value of identity for those listening, and I don't know which parts they'll identify with, but it's a stripping away, and it's different for everyone what gets stripped away. But the whole point of it is that all of those things, God gives them all back to you, but in a really healthy way that they're all anchored in Him and not in anything that's not really stable, I guess. Because, confidence, for example, wherever my confidence was anchored, it's now completely anchored in God because I know that actually everything comes from Him. And at the end of the day, He's given me abilities, but He's the one that brings the favor. He's the one that brings, all of it. So it's being completely submitted and surrendered to him in what he's gonna do in the situation. So the confidence is more in him as a person than experience, familiar things, skills, abilities,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
Is there anything you could share about um, starting to come out of the Identity Valley?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. And because I went through this model about 13, 14 years ago, at that point I was in the second valley, the valley of wholeness, and I'd just come out of a burnout season. So when you're coming out of a valley season because all of a sudden it's like there's an invitation or a shift in like a job offer or in the coming out of the valley of identity, Tony talks about having a sponsor. So anyway, a door opened for me. I don't think I recognized it right away that it was. I didn't even know I was in the identity valley, but yeah. So something happened for me, but it's like the new season that you go into, which is the fulfillment of your calling after this one. It's convergence. That's the only word that I can explain. So it's like God's bringing together all kinds of different pieces from your whole life into doing a role that is very convergent, because it's including lots of things. So it will include what you've just been through in the last decade, but even stuff from before that. And it's like everything, and I'm just at the very beginning of this, but everything starts to make sense as to experiences you've been through. It might be job roles or other experiences. It's like he starts to bring it all together and it's carefully crafted to be exactly who you are. It's such an interesting experience, not necessarily comfortable because there's things you might feel rusty in that you haven't done in a while. There's things that you may have given up on and thought, oh, I'm not going to be doing that again, but actually it comes back in a different way. God puts it all together. I've written down the word here, deconglobulated, if that's a
Hmm.
word. You feel a bit like that because you just feel like you've been taken. It's like all like almost like Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall and had a great fall, and all the king's men couldn't put him together again. But it's almost like you've done a Humpty Dumpty and you've fallen down and you're all in pieces. But then God does actually put you together again. But everything feels a bit deconglobulated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So in this um, transitioning on from the discombobulated state into this new adventure with the future, how would you describe how you're finding God working with you in that's new for you?
Well, first of all, it's a huge relief because you think, oh, that's what was going on. And even though I haven't fully processed the years, I now can have conversations with God about it and say, okay, Lord, these were the things that I really struggled with. What were you doing? What have you given me? What's it all
Wow.
been about and what's it for?
Yeah.
So it started so realizing that it's been a valley, that I'm through it. I'm at the very beginning of the journey of the next part is so helpful to open up communication on a level with him that I haven't had for some time because I've had the communication and the connection with him, but not on the deeper stuff like this because it's been a journey of faith, right? He's wanted me to go through the time without knowing, and that's part of a type of faith that he builds in us is takes us through periods of time of not knowing.
Yep.
and not talking to us about things he normally would, because he wants us to, he withdraws. It's not like he withdraws his love or his communication, but he withdraws giving us all the answers we want for a period because he wants us to trust him and learn how to trust him even in the not knowing. So that's obviously something he's done in me, and I'm sure he's done it in lots of other people as well. They can recognize it. But being able to have the conversations now and
Yep.
process what, that's just really exciting. Um,
Makes the
yeah.
valley worth it.
No, I wouldn't say that just yet, but I'm sure I will in a year or two, maybe. I
Okay.
think it will take a couple of years, honestly, to fully unpack everything. I mean, another thing that I can feel and sense, and I suppose in some ways I'm a bit different to other people because I teach this stuff, but we talk about life messages, as something that's formed in us, and I know, I've gone through the exercise of knowing what my life messages are, but they're shifting and they're changing, and
Hmm.
part of that is going into different arenas now, which have opened up. But it's like the fulfillment of a lot of those life messages. The message is coming out differently in terms of the words,
Hmm.
in terms of the authority behind it, in terms of my connection to my message. It's like you step, and this is what my friends were saying last night, that they've noticed, for example, they just don't care what people think anymore. That's any of that's just gone. There's a confidence in just being who you are and just showing up and being able to express things very confidently that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to before, because
Hmm.
like God's formed the message in you. And I don't know how he does it in that time, but that is one of the signs of coming out of the valley of identity as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. And lastly, would you like to share with us how coaching can help people go through these valleys specifically?
Yeah. So another couple of things when you're coming out of the valley, and this relates to how the coaching works, is your role's going to change. So for some people, so coaching can really help with this because when you're coming out of the valley of identity, and for some that is around retirement age, and for some it's, I mean, there's a lot of people like myself and you, Gerard, that won't retire because we don't really believe in retirement in the traditional sense. You know what I'm saying? But you want to be purposeful, don't you? Even in the years where you may have retired from another role, but your role's going to change. What you do is going to change. What you're called, what your title is going to change. Coaching can really help you to figure out what your role actually is, what the role is that God's giving you, in and find the language for it and pull together all the jigsaw pieces that essentially have been pulled apart and put together again in a different way to help you figure out what that is and how what it looks like and what it might look like. Um,
So, can you
yeah.
give an example of how coaching would help someone that feels like Humpty Dumpty that fell on the ground and he's all discombobulated on the ground?
Well, it's saying, okay, let's look at all the jigsaw pieces first of
Yep.
all, because you don't
Okay.
necessarily can't do that. A lot of coaching's about awareness, and that's
Hmm.
why I'm excited about to do this podcast because I'm kind of believing in faith that by listening to it, it's going to make some connections for people in their heart and their brain and their spirit as they're
Hmm.
listening to it. So it helps you to be aware of what the pieces are. And then it helps, obviously, with the coaching that we do, which is called co-creative transformational coaching. It, with God's help, with bringing him into the conversation, we're looking at what the pieces are, but also how he's put them back together again and what Humpty Dumpty now looks like.
Mm.
Because he's not going to look like the same chap he did before he fell off the wall. He's going to look different. And in fact, it's all about coming back to original design because everything God does is bring us back to his original plan, his original design.
Yep.
He shines it all up. It's a better version of, in a sense, I think. So even though we're older, and I think that's why we carry more influence when we come out of the valley of identity because like that authority, that message, that confidence that's built,
Hmm.
suddenly Humpty Dumpty's probably not sitting on a wall anymore. He's probably doing something more interesting instead that he was designed to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the revelations I had when I was broken in pieces on the ground in this picture is that I realized that every part of me had the fingerprints of God on it in my life, in my purpose, in my destiny. So it's like, even though you think everything's broken and it doesn't make sense and all is lost, you actually find that actually God's so much in every part of you. It's quite crazy, really, just how much of God's in it, and the bits that are disappearing are kind of like the parts of your identity that aren't connected with God, we'll say.
Yeah.
But you realize that the only bits that really matter are the bits that are connected with God.
But that's not easy, is it? Because the parts that he's taken away, you realize in the end they weren't actually good for you or, part of who you're meant to be, but they might have felt part of you, mightn't they?
Yeah, but when you see yourself as a jigsaw puzzle on the table and you're like, that's got God on it, that's got God on it, that's got God on it. Ah, that one doesn't, and it doesn't
Yeah.
fit back in the picture. So you
Yeah.
just put it to one side, and yeah, and you see that. Oh, now there's a picture of a son of God doing amazing things, serving God, as opposed to someone that was motivated by other identity characteristics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which you wouldn't have known about. And I think that's a big thing in this is not for us to feel guilty or ashamed or assign blame. It's just part of the process, isn't it, Gerard?
yeah,
It's but God chooses when to sort out what, and this is kind of what he chooses to sort out right at the end, is all those final little pieces that are kind of stopping you fully being who he wants you to be, isn't it?
yeah. And in Tony Stoltzfus's book, he researches 50 people that have gone through their life journey, plus a whole lot of biblical characters,
Yeah.
and identifies the valley of identity for a whole lot of main biblical characters, so that you can see that God's actually doing this with everyone. And it's just, you know, the process that God takes us all through to bring us into, you know,
Yeah.
fulfillment.
Yeah, something I love doing is coaching people. Well, I mean, I've been doing it for years, even though I've only just actually gone through my Valley of Identity. But I think coaching is really helpful for people when you can post process the valley,
Yep.
which I've done for several clients. And that's sort of showing you what God's done and encouraging you and building you up for the next season because you can sort of start to see how it fits into where you're going. And it helps you to put that role together that suits you or to make decisions and,
Hmm.
you know, take some risks that you might need to take because it makes sense of the valley. But also going back to the season before that, which is called releasing. I think, wow, okay, now I know that I was in releasing then. You can sort of go through the decade or so that was that season and know that all the things that were being released were part of what's going to happen on a bigger scale now. We're in the next season, it's like
Yep.
they are all the pieces that will make up the role for the future ones. So it's
Yeah.
really helpful to, I think, to process it all with a coach. I love coaching people
Yep.
through all this stuff. Well, I mean, I'm a purpose girl, aren't I? So yeah,
It's your thing. Yep.
yeah.
Well, it's been lovely to chat about that, and we look forward to more of these deep God experiences that you've got coming out in the podcast.
Yeah, so I'd just say to people, if you've resonated with any of that, um, and you think you might want to know more, then yeah, contact us and I'd love to coach you one to one, or get you on a program that will help you just work it all out really and be encouraged and be able to get through it more easily, really. That's my hope.
Or
Yeah,
recommend one of your trained coaches.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you for listening.